of evolution. Speciation. In fact, it is the process by which the new species develop from the existing species. That phenomenon is known as speciation. When a population of single species splits into two or more groups, which may be separated by geographical barriers, geographical conditions, like say they are being separated by rivers, or they are being separated by on the two different ends of the oceans, or two different sides of the mountain, one of the side receiving more amount of rain, another side receiving less amount of rain that way. Then a whole new range, the range of new species is formed. That phenomenon is known as speciation. So the variations arise in this speciation, and that is carried out by the process of natural selection in this case. Now, the genetic drift, that is a random process of these organisms, become incapable to reproduce among themselves. What happens? That they are separated by these barriers, and not only that, they themselves develop into so many different characteristics that their genes are complete. That after few generations would be, let me tell you, 10,000, 15,000 generations. But after these many generations, the genetic drift becomes so random. It takes place so randomly. Then because of that, these living organisms become completely different from each other. So different that they, even if they try to copulate, then also the process of reproduction does not take place between them. That means they do not reproduce the new offspring if they are from the different species. They themselves become of different species. The gene flow ceases to exist between the isolated members, even though originally they were from the same species. Therefore, geographical isolation in long run leads to reproductive isolation. That means the reproduction of the two different species originated from the same species that were the offsprings of the same parent. But then also, after so many generations, due to such genetic drift, what happens? They lead to reproductive isolation. In a single group of population, which are geographically isolated organisms, several different types of changes can take place. For example, in the constitution of DNA, or as the number of chromosomes in the cells, that is the basic thing, that may also change. The structural change will take place in case of chromosome. That means their whole chromosomal complex would completely change. That type of change can take place during the process of speciation. The gametes of these kind of isolated members of organisms, they are unable to join with each other for the process of fertilization. Even if they try to, then also the process of reproduction will not take place. Due to such reasons, the phenomenon of the speciation occurs. What is the effect of geographical isolation on speciation? Then the geographical isolation becomes extremely major factor in the field of, or in the process of speciation, especially if that process of reproduction is a sexual method of reproduction. When a population of groups of species are geographically isolated, the gene flow between them, they cease altogether, so that they cannot reproduce sexually. And that is why the isolation, geographical barrier becomes extremely important factor. If the population groups are maintained separately in isolation, then the variations in this genetic complex is also maintained separately. The genetic complex will also become separate or completely different. In separate geographical environment, whatever the characteristics which is considered to be the fittest naturally, that selected variations are selected. And then that is maintained into the next coming generations. So the changes in the genetic constitution and extremely heavy fluctuations in genetic drift, that cause the increase in variation in the isolated population groups. And due to that, what happens? A two new, completely different species is being obtained. So after being converted into completely new species, even if they come in contact, even if they try to copulate, even if they try to reproduce, they cannot interbreed, they cannot reproduce. But the same geographical isolation, that is not the major factor of speciation, especially in self-pollinating plant species. Here the process of reproduction is sexual, but it is self-pollination. That is mainly because in self-pollination process of plant, sexual method of reproduction, that occurs between the reproductive units of the single flower, or else between two different flowers of the same particular plant, and that gives us to new offspring. And because of that reason, geographical isolation does not play as a major factor in speciation of self-pollinating plant. So the genetic material of only single parent, in case of self-pollinating plant, that flows as a hereditary material. But let us understand that during the process of gametogenesis, that is in case of male spermatogenesis and in case of female oogenesis, during meiotic division, the new combination of crossing over, we studied about that, of genes that is responsible for formation of variation. But what happens in the self-pollination? The same plant, that means the flowers of the same plant or else the same flower. So such things does not take place. The alteration in the genetic constitution as well as in number and constitution of chromosomes, that is the number of chromosomes or the structure of chromosomes, that can lead to bring about these variations. So the factors, not only geographical conditions, but there may be so many other factors which might be responsible for forming variations and for forming the new species, that means for formation of the process of speciation.